Hey guys, how's it going? I'm the Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi, needing a haircut music YouTuber. You can't see it because the contrast is ridiculous, but I'm holding my hair as we speak. I'm looking at OBS. Yeah, it's pretty long. It's pretty long. I need to cut it, or get someone to cut it. But you know what doesn't need to be cut is these awesome early Deaththrash releases. I wish they were longer. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we were talking about some more death metal. Today, we are actually talking about actual death metal, or at least death thrash, early, first wave, proto, or like early old school death metal. We're talking about the earliest of the death metal possible. We're beyond the influence of death metal. Now we are in actual death metal. Welcome back to the death metal chart. It is time for some actual death metal with the original stuff that you could probably actually call death metal now. Maybe in the magazines at the time, they might say something a bit different because times were weird back then. But you know, it's we live in the now, the here and the now, and we can actually define what is or isn't death metal, as arbitrary as it may seem. And of course, what would any at all early death metal review be without the inclusion of Death's seminal breakthrough debut album, Scream Bloody Gore, a fan favorite, death metal favorite, a lot of people's favorite, and I gotta be honest with you guys, it's a banger. Yes, it is very good. If you had any doubts in your mind on whether or not Duke would like it, Duke does like it. I especially love how at the time it just feels so particularly heavy. Sure, it is a lot of thrash metal, probably 50% thrash metal, but it breaks away into some really technical riffage. It breaks away into some slower, doomier portions, and that's what makes it probably my favorite of these really early death metal releases. It's got some variety going for it. It's still primitive, but it's very heavy with the really punchy bass. And the tones are kind of what separate it from thrash metal. But in my opinion, what really separates it from thrash metal is how it's actually a bit technical. You know, it has the more, instead of chugging on that low note and alternating with another riff, it's the chugging on the low note is part of the riff. You know, it alternates it to the same string. It's kind of something that's you don't really notice until you look back at it. And of course, Chuck Schuldner's vocals were insane for the time. They're still really good, but at the time, Jesus must have floored a lot of people. It is not that melodic at all. It really relies on that thrashy, punchy edge to it, but it just goes one step further, which is probably what some people see as kind of a weird connection to death metal, because death metal actually gets decently melodic at points, especially when you get into melodic death metal, but here you have just straight up punch, just a lot of power. A couple favorite tracks off here are Mutilation and the track Scream Bloody Gore as well, amazing. The song Evil Dead is also a real highlight where it has some really gorgeous melodic playing that probably highlights, I don't know, something that the entire rest of death metal would really get into. Even up to brutal death metal, you'll find melodic playing that pulls from this release, specifically this song. It's a really fun song. It's a hit. This is like one of the most influential death metal albums of all time. I might even be a fool to give it anything other than a great, which is why I'm giving it great. Not that I'm like particularly smart or anything. I think it's pretty commonly held opinion that Scream Bloody Gore is a fantastic album. But you know what? Symbolic is better. Now, don't go in my comments being like, Duke, Symbolic's not better, it's too technical. No, it's not. As a former progressive rock fiend, seriously, I couldn't get enough of progressive rock, I know when there gets to be too much technicality. I think Dream Theater is garbage. I think a lot of tech death is way overblown and way overwrought. Death rarely, if ever, gets there. Symbolic never gets there. Every riff on Symbolic is super melodic and awesome, and it's just catchy enough to kind of push itself past all of its contemporaries. It feels like a genre-defining album. I'm not even going to argue about this. Symbolic by Death, and I'll probably at the last episode of this series, I'll probably mention why I have to mention this one. But yeah, this is the only Death album on the whole chart. Scream Bloody Gore, that is. Symbolic is not on this chart. Could you imagine talking about death metal without Symbolic? That's the only death metal album I own. I own a Gojira album, but that one doesn't count. Either way, we're talking about the band Pentagram next, from Chile. No, not the doom metal Pentagram. This is Chilean Pentagram. They're death metal, as you could probably tell. It's a compilation. It is an insanely unique album. It's even hard to know where to begin with it. It could just be because of the regional impacts, but it's got like a really manic edge to it. It feels kind of like Blackened Crust, but with some crossover thrash. Really weird combination here. It's super unique. The flavor is uniquely evil, which would definitely influence bands like probably Morbid Angel. It's on the raw side, but it is also exceptionally dark. It is really heavy. It's actually kind of amazing stuff. I don't know how much it actually influenced, but it sounds like it influenced a whole lot. It's really dirty sounding, really aggressive. I love it. It's great. And next is the band Ripping Corpse with the album Dreaming with the Dead. So this is a pretty interesting early extreme metal example with a dozen influences easily. It just sounds like so many different things. It does suffer from 1980s death metal production. You know, just riffs are kind of hard to hear. It's got a really muddy quality to it, which really detracts from the quality of the listening experience. Of course, old school death metal, a lot of it is a struggle in the terms of production. You know, we wouldn't reach like the absurd production techniques of like deathcore in the 2000s where things were so bassy and vocals had enough reverb to sound like a cavern. Of course, you know, like I don't know, Finland had some stuff that was doing pretty decently with that in the 90s, but you know, here it was kind of floundering about with production. This does have some very solid riffs, definitely Slayer inspired, you know, very fast, thrashy, kind of all over the place, chaotic even. It also has an immersion problem. In all honesty, it feels silly at points, which I don't know how I'm supposed to really love this album when it sounds kind of silly. So I think it's just okay. Say what you want. Maybe you love this album. It's not my favorite. And up next, we got the band Massacre with Enjoy the Violence, which is another example of an album that just feels like early death metal, you know, very primitive, kind of caveman. But the production is actually a bit of an improvement here. There are some good vocals, and it has a really dark atmosphere, which a lot of albums, you know, post early 90s kind of forego entirely. The song Revealing Cruelty does show a lot of creativity. You know, it's got a really unique structure, really cool riffs, but the rest of the album, in all honesty, kind of seems to lack creativity. It seems to have kind of repetitive structures, you know, not a lot of riffs that really inspire me. So I think this one's just okay too. And now we're on to the other album that really matters this video, Possessed, 7 Churches. Now, some people really wonder, when did death metal become death metal and stop being just thrash metal? When did it stop being thrash metal that was so heavy you might want to call it death metal? And when did it start being death metal that had just so much thrash metal influence that it was death thrash? A lot of people say it's Possessed 7 Churches. Of course, there are demos that exist before this one. Both Possessed and Death have them, plus one other band. Who really cares? I really care about Sodom's early EPs when they were making black metal, and same with Poison, real caveman riffs that matter. But Possessed is certainly cool. It is incessantly thrashy. It is as thrashy as anything else on this chart, even more thrashy than something like Sepultura. Honestly, you could claim it's more thrashy than something like Slayer. It is so thrashy. It just doesn't quit. So many swank beats, even some faster stuff, and except for the points where the drums stay the same, but the riffs just kind of drop down even lower, kind of dragging on the floor. In all honesty, though, many of these riffs still feel fresh today. It sounds very innovative. It's decently technical, if for nothing else than the sheer speed of this thing. It feels like it doesn't give up. It feels half its length. The song lengths are pretty short, so, you know, comparisons to something like Slayer are still going to be there. And also the vocals are pretty yelly, you know, they don't feel quite like maybe the more death-leaning stuff that, like, you know, Death would do, even though that was sort of the generic sort of be-all, end-all vocals of the time. But, you know, it's considered a classic for a real reason. You know, I'm not going to go out there and say it's got, like, insane technicality, really. There's some decent technicality, but it's not doing any riffs that really explode my mind, like going all over the place. But in terms of sheer thrashiness, heaviness, evilness, you know, it's all here. For early death metal, it kind of starts with Possessed. And it's great. But get it through your head, yes, you, I'm pointing at you, that it's not the best death metal album of all time. I'm going to stand by that. And you know what is better? Symbolic by Death. You know what else is better? Scream Bloody Gore by Death. And next we go into a band I've talked about many times on this channel, Sarcophaga with The Laws of Scourge. betraying me. My Brazilian boys are betraying me by making death metal, even though they were making black metal before. And the black metal was amazing and cavernous and evil and punky and amazing. And here they do some technical riffage and weak production, and it's still pretty good, actually. Certainly some innovative riffs. It does a lot more than INRI in terms of exploring scales, I guess. But the production is a bit underwhelming. They clean it up in a way that just doesn't really do it a lot of favors. And it's sort of back to them being Slayer worship. Honestly, as much as the riffs take a sort of increase in technicality and even production, the evilness takes a decrease. And for that, I just can't really give it the praise that some people might think it deserves. They lost a lot of percussive qualities, which is weird because death metal is a super percussive genre. Not that I'm going to go back in time to the late 80s, early 90s and tell Sarcophaga that they're not making proper death metal, because they probably didn't know what that was yet. They were kind of helping invent it. So it's still good. It's like a decent listening experience. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong for loving it, but it's good. It's just not INRI. And that's enough old school Deaththrash for the video. And I think I'm showing a bit of bias here, Like, I would much rather listen to actual death metal than Deaththrash. I love my extreme thrash metal. I love Morbid Saint, for example. But this sort of early Deaththrash stuff, it's like, what I think does that a little better? I don't know, like Death Crush, Mayhem, or like Celtic Frost for like black metal's sake. I'm totally biased. But it's really like kind of good? Modern death thrash. It's not bad at all. And this chart talks about a little bit of modern death thrash, and we're going to cover it for you guys today. No Oxygen Destroyer is not here if you're looking for a big name, a big popular name. But we do have a band called Excoriate with their album On Pestilent Winds. Sheesh, this thing's got speed, it's got momentum, and more than anything else, my lord, does it have riffs. So here you get something that is really pummeling and aggressive, something that is definitely influenced by some more modern death metal, honestly some stuff more like Obituary once you reach the actual 90s. I'm sure it influenced this one, and I'm sure they kind of went and pulled it back just a little bit. But in all honesty, if you're trying to get into death metal from thrash metal, maybe something like this is also just as good a way to do it as something like, I don't know, Death or Slayer, one of those. But what differentiates this from other thrash metal is the tremolo riffs, the low-pitched, low-hanging tremolo riffs that old school death metal loves to use. So many of those. The guitars are stupidly heavy, and there's a really nice dosage of vocal reverb, which makes this thing just sound really nice. The production is intense with a lot of density, and it doesn't sound like the overly slick modern death metal production you'd get on a whole lot of modern stuff. It doesn't sound like squeaky or like wet in a way that isn't kind of gross. If it sounds like it's like dripping, like some early 2000s stuff, or cavernous and dry in some ways, it's hard to explain. I'm really giving a lot of abstract imagery here to death metal music production, but basically it doesn't sound overly clean. You could hear all the elements, but they're fit together in a way that's just a little bit reverbial. It's blended well. That's what I'm meaning to say. It's blended well, and it sounds great. And the closer is just a 10-minute banger. The way it progresses is just ridiculous. In all honesty, it is a super cool way to update the sound that came from the 80s. It's reverential, but it's not in a way that feels like it's copying. It feels like it's in a way that is fully influenced and unashamed, but also not afraid to push the boundary a little bit. So this one's great. And next we're going to a band called Vader with Litany. This is closing out the day, and this is an album that a lot of people don't even think is thrashy. It's a little bit thrashy, but more importantly, it's heavy, and it's also really good. Super clean production. You hear everything here, which some, and by some I mean me, might find that a little tiny bit of a detraction, but it's not horrible by any means. You can hear everything decently. It's fit together in a way that's clean, but not like squeaky clean and like gross where you can like, it doesn't even feel blended anymore. It's a little bit blended, which is fine. It's full of these really nice melodic low-hanging tremolo riffs that I just old school death metal loves, but the thrashiness and the speed of this whole thing, really the speed. This might be like one of the fastest albums we've got so far, and honestly, for like the whole rest of the whole chart. It's just whirring forward at Mach speed. The vocals are also awesome in compared to the early Deaththrash stuff. You know, they are roaring. They're absolutely sick, which I love how death metal vocals get just a lot better in the 90s. It's a short album, and there's our short songs in here, but it's, if nothing else, it's got intensity. So if you want an album that's just intense, Vader's Litany is the one for you. And it's a little bit thrashy. You know, it's fast. It feels good. It's what people liked in the 80s. They did a lot here. It's just happened a lot later. And that is it for today. A bit of a short video, a short little retrospective at Deaththrash. Because in all honesty, I'm trying to just reach actual death metal. I'm really hyped to just start talking about the big things for you guys, because it's what I prefer, and I like talking about what I like on this channel. But you know, we have a couple bangers here. The Deaththrash revival is still really good. I should probably actually listen to some Oxygen Destroyer. Maybe I'll come back to you guys with that on some point. But in the meantime, hope you enjoy some Death, some Possessed, some Vader, or perhaps even these other bands that I didn't love all that much. But either way, hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe would be super appreciated. Any comments, questions, or concerns down there. My social media is in the description. My Instagram, my X, my Discord, which is actually probably the most important and entertaining thing that I have down there, because I post a lot of music recommendations. We have a lot of people, I guess, discussing music on there. It's really fun. Yeah, that's about it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys have a good day. Bye.